Yeah, hi. Welcome once again to another video on hidden behind hidden doors. My name is Ryan, and if this is the first time you're watching, one of my videos, I want to say I really appreciate you. Thank you. I don't believe in coincidence, so you're where you're supposed to be. When you're done, kindly subscribe. And you can turn on the notification button so that anytime I drop a new video, you'll be notified. And above all, like the video and share it. And for those of you who subscribed already, thank you so much. Bible says we should not despise days of little beginnings. And like I said in my last video, the aim or the goal is to grow this to a stage where it becomes a global platform. Where people could call in, where eventually we'll begin to live stream and have people call in, or drop topics they want us to talk about. Thank you for subscribing. Again, I would say, share the video because somebody out there, could really, use this. I can't recall when I did the last video, but it's been pretty challenging. Yeah, but I guess that comes with the turf, and so I've learned to roll with the punches. Yeah, so I did promise. I started talking about my first marital relationship. And a couple of things I want to elaborate on is when I said that in retrospect I have no regrets with regards to how I treated with regards to my role in the relationship. I think that's slightly untrue because I was much younger then, and I've really never been one that was patient, and so I grew up knowing that I grew up believing that, or I grew up knowing that small things, light things treat light things seriously and treat serious things lightly, because the light things will become serious if you don't handle it. It's almost like the stitching time saves nine. So in retrospect, I guess there are a couple of things that I really wouldn't have been very picky about. I could have just let slide. Because again, a relationship is made up of two people from two different backgrounds. Yeah, so that's for that. And then I actually went into it with this mindset, and I believed that if you if you created the right environment for someone, you know, right environment, nurturing environment, nothing lacking, that you enable the person to make better choices. But that's not true, because people will always be. I did talk about, my dad's history of buying a piglet if you told your dad you wanted to get married. And so, it's not true. You can't, it's wrong for you to go into a relationship with the goal of changing the person. I mean, if there's anybody that needs to change, it's you. You need to work on yourself and believe and prayerfully hope the other person is working on herself. Because when both of you are committed to working on yourselves, it's a win-win. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I think I ended about the night prior to Thanksgiving, where she hassled me until I had to go get contraceptive. But then again, there were some other things. So the night before the wedding, like I said, this was a church that was started in my aunt's kitchen, so I knew the church. Both her parents were pastors there. And like I said, I walked in there not knowing it was a trap, and I walked in there and then the trap was shut. And I'm kind of honorable when I give you my word, I try to back it. Because what's the value of a man's word if he can't keep it? But then, funny enough, the night before the wedding, I received a call from her younger sister who wasn't around, who didn't live around us. She lived in another country. I had never met her, but I had heard about her. And she called me, and it was kind of strange, you know. And she said this. She said, now again, this is the night before the wedding, and she said, "Do you think you know my sister?" And I said, yeah, I think I do. And she said, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "No, I don't think you do. My sister she's, what was the word she used? I think that's where I got, I think that's where I also mentioned the frame. Yeah, she said she's a pathological liar. And I kind of laughed about it, but the night before the wedding, I was going to call it off. I'd already seen the red flags, so this was another reason to call it off. Better late than never. But I still went ahead and we got married. And I recall that one of the prerequisites to getting married is you need to go for counseling, and then blood work to be sure that nobody, it's supposed to be, both of you are virgins, nobody's sexually active, but basically I think it's to be sure that the lady is not pregnant, or that both of you have compatible blood groups. Now I recall I was really busy working, and counseling is supposed to be a series of days. And the first day I went there, the pastor who was in charge of the counseling told me, "You know what, Ryan, you don't need to come. You don't need to come every day. Don't worry, I'll take care of it." I'll take care of it. And I told him thank you, and I continued working. So, well, but something I can remember, was I think the first time we met with this associate pastor, I think he asked, what was one thing that attracted me to her, and what was one thing that attracted her to me. And I think I said something about, because I'm a leg person. I said, yeah, she had nice legs, and she was intelligent. And then they asked, her, and even now as I think back, it was just weird. And she paused for a while, and he said, no, what's one thing about this man that attracts you, that you like? And she said, the hair. I like his forearms, the hair on his forearms, and in my mind I'm like, that's the first time, and so yeah, the marriage went through. I had more guests than I anticipated. Um, we had Thanksgiving the next day at my parents' church, and then we moved to another city because, like I said, I didn't want my mom having unfettered access to her. Um, and yeah, so temperamentally, I am a mix of choleric and melancholic. With choleric being the more dominant temperament. And with a degree in engineering, I usually approach things with a rational mindset. How do I get things? What do I want? And I recall that when the whole the marriage hit the rocks, The Bible says, first of all, talk with yourselves, and then if you can, excuse me, if you can be resolved, then you talk with people who are more mature than you, and then you talk to the elders in the church, and then if there's still no head with them, both of you should go your ways. So I remember the pastor back then, the church we used to attend. He sent word and he said, what's with this guy? Does he have a death wish? You might not understand this, but with due time, you will. And so I had told her, I said, the first year, we're not going to start a family. Let's use the first year to get to know ourselves better, and then the second year we could have kids. Mind you, she was still, vacillating between her university and home, and I recall that I did one of the most egregious things I'd ever done. So back then, when you graduate from college, you're supposed to do a 1 year paramilitary service, but you have the option to opt out. Maybe based on age, or health, and so she came to me with this BS story that the results had been out, but the class president was trying to. I mean, it was just crazy, bizarre stories, and that's the thing. She'll give you bizarre stories, and you would believe it or you start doubting yourself. And so I said, okay, you know what? I'm going to make a few calls, and so I made a few calls, and I actually got her. I got her exempted from that 1 year paramilitary service. Not the best of things to do, but that's just me. But it was good I did, because it till today it shows that she didn't do that. She didn't do that 1 year paramilitary service, because it was forged. The certificate was forged. Because I compared it with mine, and I'm like, this is strange. And it cost me some money. But this has been going into it with all that. That's who I am. If when I like something, I go for it, and when I'm into it, I give it my all. Yeah, so that was something I did, just to, she wasn't working then, I was working. And so, I told her, maximum 2 kids, but not this year. And so, I was using prophylactics and she was using contraceptives. And the second month, she contracted bronchitis, and so she went to see my GP. And without asking her, if she was on any family planning any family planning thing or not, he prescribed antibiotics to her. And so basically what happened was the antibiotics nullified the contraceptives she was on. And my daughter was conceived in the second month, which also brings me to, I keep on saying this, talking about the scripture. Many are the plans in a man's heart, but God's decree is what stands sure. And still today, I still see it happening. You make so much plans, and at the end of the day, it just falls to pieces, and so when I found out she was pregnant, of course, having a DNC wasn't on the cards for me. But I recall coming home one day, and I walk softly. I walk softly. I have very keen vision. I have very keen hearing, and to a point that freaks people out. And I recall coming home one day and she was on the phone again. She had this phone thing. Oh, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, so yeah. So you just when I talked about the phone, so I had issues with the way she was always on the phone, And so one of the days she came to see me, I said, you know, why are you always on the phone? I said, can you not live your life without the phone? What will happen to you if your phone gets missing? And the next weekend, she took a trip and her phone got stolen. And so she came to me and she was crying and she said it was you and I was the one who caused it. Well, I don't take myself lightly. I'm careful about the things I say because I know my words carry weight. Um, and so when she told me her phone was stolen, I tried to be nice. So I got her a new line, and I drove over to her house and gave it to her. And I can remember my colleague then, Jimmy. Jimmy said, "Why are you buying? You complain about the phone, and you're buying her a phone?" And I said, "Well, so the line she had, I was the one who bought it, line, SIM card, and all that." Anyway, so I came home. I come home this evening, and she's on the phone, um, and I couldn't help. I think it was on speaker, so I knew she was speaking with the same sister who had called me the night before the wedding and was asking me, "Do you think you really know my sister?" And they were talking about, doing a DNC. Mind you, her younger sister was berating her. Why would you get pregnant so soon? And all that. And she was. And so I got in there and I said, "Are you crazy or what are you guys talking about?" Of course, she tried to play it off and all that, and you know, but I thank God that I heard that. There's another scripture that I love, that directs me. It says, it's in Psalms. It says, it's the glory of God to conceal a matter. It's the honor of kings to search it out. Because when God wants you to see stuff, He lets you. But if He doesn't want you to see it, there's no amount of attempt, no amount of effort you put in that you would see it. And so the first year, while she was pregnant, because we had moved to another city, we didn't have a car then, and so I told myself, my wife shouldn't be, going commercial vehicles and all that. So I bought a car. It was a Mercedes Benz, 190E, and I told her to be driving it, while I found my way, because I didn't want my child to be exposed to anything, accidents and all that. Um, However, she had nothing doing, and I was raised again. Life above vacuum, Um, I was raised on learning a skill, and so I told her. I said, "Hey, okay. While we're waiting for a job, is there something you want to try and learn? And at that point, my my supervisor or my immediate supervisor, I'll call it supervisor then, um, the wife had a beauty salon. She used to make hair and all that. And so I told my spouse, I said, "Hey, you know what? Why don't you go, stay with this lady and then, learn something." Again, I told you, my mom's rule was after high school, you go learn a skill, go learn a craft, go learn a vocation. And so I told her at the same time. She was like, "You know what? I don't want to learn hair." And I said, "Well, you have to do something. You can't just sit at home doing nothing." And until today, that's like one of the greatest mistakes I made, because uh, the character of the person I sent her to was, That was like the worst person. It's just almost like pouring gas on the flame. Putting um, two people with uh, low morals, putting them together, so they became very good friends. And then when my daughter was born, um, I wanted to put her in a crèche, and my spouse then said, why no, in all these crutches, there's a lot of witchcraft. There's a lot of juju and there's a lot of voodoo, and they give the baby sleeping pills so nobody looks after them. I'm like, what are you talking about? So I went ahead, because I realized she didn't have anything to offer. So I went ahead and I enrolled my kid in a crèche, and she went on later to do ballet, and you know yeah. So back to it. When my daughter was born, I mean, I took the day off. I didn't ask for permission. This is my child. And I wanted to be in there, but the doctor didn't allow me to go in there. And so I remember staying in her room and praying. And it was funny because I was about to drive off to work, um, and she had this friend who was staying with her, who would come around to see her. And the friend came and told me, what this pain she's going through, it's labor pains, because I didn't know what it was. And so I shelved work that day and I just put her in the vehicle and drove her to the hospital. And so we got there and she was like, what, 1 centimeter dilated or something. So I stayed with her and they were trying to call me. I remember my boss in the office sending me a text saying, am I the first person who's having a child? I should come to work. In my mind, I said, screw you. Um, and when eventually, she was well dilated, and they wheeled her into the theater. I spent the entire time praying. Before then, I'd already picked out the names I wanted to give to. I wanted to give my daughter. Um, and I recall the first time I heard my daughter cry. It's something I can never forget. So that's how we became a family. But what I found out was at the end of that year, I knew I had picked the wrong hand. I didn't need anyone to tell me, because back I think it's still the norm today. You have a friend who's in a relationship, and you come in and you see some things that stand out to you, and you don't speak. Because you say, if I speak and then they make up, then I'm going to be the subject of their combined wrath. I think that's just BS to me. If you see something wrong, call it out. Because I had people come around and say, okay, after the whole thing was over, he said, Ryan, when I came over, I was asking myself, where did Ryan pick this girl from? And I'm like, for goodness sake, why didn't you tell me then? You know, and even her cousin who came around and spent some time in my house after the divorce, he was telling me, you know, he came to see me. He came to see the kind of man who would marry his cousin, and this was his cousin who, I mean, they attended the same university. She stayed in their house for a while, and but all the while he was there, he refused to acknowledge that. When people would ask him, "Hey, is she your cousin?" he would say no, just because of her antecedents. But this chap came to my house and he was telling me that he came to actually see who the person was. And I remember that, before we got married, tradition, culturally, you need to go around and, you know, introduce yourself or get introduced to people who she stayed with, people who were important in her life. And I remember going to see her uncle, because her mom, they were just three, the man, and then my ex mother-in-law, and then the younger sister. I remember getting there, and when I introduced myself, or she introduced me, I can't remember how it even went. The wife of her aunt by marriage started laughing, and I was a little bit concerned. I was like, well, this is something serious. At least it was serious to me. And she said, and she called her name, and she said, you're getting married? And she laughed. I didn't know, I didn't know. I didn't, I mean, I saw some flag, but I didn't know how bad it was, and so I was wondering, and I was a little bit upset. But in retrospect, I realized that the lady was surprised that somebody actually came, and then someone was willing to marry her. So that was it. And so at the end of the first year, I realized, wrong choice. Back then, there used to be lingo. It's I've entered one chance, because then they would kidnap you and all that. So by then I knew, it wasn't. I had made a mistake, but what I don't, I can't just pull out the plug. Let's see how it goes. But Proverbs 11:22 says, a woman who lacks discretion is like putting a gold ring in the snout of a pig. And so it was just one situation to another. I raised my daughter myself, even though she was there. I was the one who taught her how to bathe my daughter, and everywhere I went with my daughter. Like I said, I'm an ambivert, and then I switched career because she really didn't like me in the military, so I switched careers. And so anytime they knew me, people I worked with, they knew that anytime I got home, don't call me, because I've spent enough time with you. What are you calling me for? So I'll get back home, and then I was able to get babysitter for my daughter, and it was just one thing after the other, and then somehow again I found out that she was having very inappropriate relationships with her uncle by marriage. So remember I said there were just three kids. So her mom's only sister and the younger sister was married to another guy, and this guy used to send her $100 regularly. I can't remember if it was every month or every week or every 2 weeks. I can't remember. It was regularly, and I was like, why is he sending you? Of course, she had access to my email. I gave her my password and all that, and she laughed and she showed me some emails, and I don't know if I blush, but the contents of those emails were bad. And I said, what exactly are you talking about? This man would send her emails and say, I dreamt about you, you were naked. And I'm like, is this your uncle? So I said, you need to stop communicating with him. Now, guess what? This guy gave us a wedding as a pre-wedding gift, a box of prophylactics. Yeah, that's what he gave us as a pre-wedding gift. And so I told her, I said, if your aunt finds out, she will kill you, because the aunt was really hot-tempered. She didn't tolerate nonsense. And I said, if she finds out, she will kill you. You need to stop, And so, as time went on, I was able to get her a job with a telecommunications firm, and I had a babysitter, and I recall asking her, why she wanted to go to. So the telecommunications firm had a call center that wasn't in town, wasn't in the city we lived in. but they had local shops, just like in America, you have Verizon shops and you have T-Mobile shops, you know. As I said, why don't you want to work in one of these shops that are in town, so you're around for me and for our kid. And she said, no, it's better working at the call center because that would put her in a better position to get promoted. And it was just one thing after the other. I'll tell her, don't do this. She would do it, and she, like I said, she's very charming, very charming. Um, usually I'll go to bed by 9, because I'd wake up early so I could run. I'll go to bed by 9, ensure that my daughter was in bed, and then I'll wake up. Usually I'd wake up like midnight. If my daughter cried, I'd wake up, and she would tell me, no, no, you don't, I'm handling it. Several times I would wake up, she wouldn't be in bed. That's my spouse wouldn't be in bed, and a few times I went looking for her, and she was on the phone, and we're talking about wee hours of the morning, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., and she just dropped my daughter on the freezer, the chest freezer we had. And for people who know a little bit about electrical appliances, there's something called static electricity. And I recall I was so upset. I said, "What's wrong with you? And who are you talking with at this point in time?" "Oh, it's my brother." "Really?" And it was just weird. And it was rocky. So on the outside, everyone was like, my wedding. I want my family to be like Ryan's family. One thing my colleagues knew then was that if they brought anything, if they had a friend who was selling stuff, that I would always buy. And I'll buy for myself, buy for her, and buy for my daughter. If I was traveling, in fact, at the local airport, they knew my daughter. Anytime I was traveling alone, they would say, "Where's your wife?" That was my daughter. We were super close, super close. Um, and then it now evolved into shifts. Day shifts and then night shifts, and I would say, why can't you are a new mom, that should be grounds for you to ask for an exemption. And so what would happen was I would come back sometimes. I wouldn't even meet her at home. She would already have gone to work, and then when I'm leaving, usually I drop off my daughter and then go to work. That's when she would be coming in. And so it was just weird. I just, again, but you don't get married because you don't trust someone. You get married because you want to build something with the person. But I already knew I was not going to have another child with her. And so, in order to be sure, I ensured that she had IUD put in. I asked the doctor, humorously, with some humor. I asked him, I said, "Can you please put two?" Because I didn't want, any chances of us having another child again. I knew that was it with her. And so it was just a case of, managing stuff. And, again, I talked about marriage. In marriage, it rhymes or synonyms: manage, damage, bondage. So when you're in the wrong marriage, it's you're either managing it or you're in bondage. And people don't know. Because most times they think domestic abuse is only about the man. The woman is always the victim, but it's not true. And I remember when people would tell me, "Hey, it was so bad that the wives of my colleagues, people I worked with then, would use me to chastise their husbands. They would say, "Hey, can't you see him? Everywhere he goes, he's with his daughter. Sometimes he's driving and feeding her," which wasn't true anyway. But why aren't you home? Why can't you be like him and all that? And I used to laugh. And I used to tell people, in my mind, I would say, "Oh, if only you knew. If only you knew." Um, and so, again, I had already set some objectives. I recall that when I bought her her car, on her birthday, we're not even speaking. We're not speaking. Um, and it was a Sunday, so I know, so we went downstairs. I just gave her the key. I said, "That's your car behind," and she drove it to church. And she got there and she was weeping. She was weeping so much that one of our family friends, who was an usher then, came to her and was asking her, "What's wrong? Why are you weeping?" And she said, "My husband bought me a car." And he said, "So are these tears of?" He said, "This should be tears of joy." And she told him, he said, "You won't understand." The man said, "I won't understand what?" She said, "You won't understand what I've done and what I'm doing." The man said, "No, if your husband bought you a car, it means he loves you. You guys can walk whatever things through. And I'm just looking at it. I'm saying, just, when something is bad, just call it out. And looking at the rate of divorces now, it's so high because people get married for the wrongest reasons. It's either because they are sexually attracted to the person, and so once that need is met, then they move to the next person, or for in my own case, she had been given an ultimatum. Just like that movie. There's this movie where, the guy didn't want to get married, and I think his grandfather left him a fortune, but the condition was that he needed to get married. I think it was Adam Sandler who played it. I can't recall the name of the movie anyway. It was just bad. And you know what? I will never forget this. I had traveled out, for business, and I received a call from the owner of the proprietress of my daughter's crèche. Um, this was a Sunday night, and she called me and she said, "Has your wife told you anything?" And I said, "No, she hasn't." She said, "I told her to tell you something." I said, "No, she hasn't told me anything." She said, "Okay, when are you coming back?" I said, "What is it?" I said, "What is it?" She said, while she was changing my daughter, it seemed like, someone had been playing with her. I, I was speechless. And the lady told me, "You know what?" I said, "Okay, I'm taking the first flight out of town, and I'm coming." And she said, "You know what? When you come, don't go home. Come straight to the crèche." And so that's exactly what I did. I took the first flight out of where that was. This was where Lagos. I took the first flight, and I remember, because it's something I do. Before I travel, I send a text. I'm about to board. Boarded. We're taxiing and all that. But I didn't do this, and I remember calling her. That's calling my ex then, and she was sounding so weak on the phone. And I said, "Are you okay?" Because my daughter was wailing in the background. So I said, "Are you okay?" She said, "No, she's not feeling fine and all that." I said, "Okay, then call the neighbor downstairs so she can come help you," because my daughter was crying. I said, "Okay, she will try." And so immediately I got, immediately we landed, like the lady had told me. I went straight to see her, and I had never been inside her home. She was in the garage. No, it wasn't the garage. She was in part of the house. She had, like a BQ. She had renovated it into like a crèche, and she took me into her living room, and that was the first time I cried as a man, as a grown man, because this lady started telling me stuff, and she said, "Does your wife know you're back?" I said, "No." She said, "Okay, just watch what's gonna happen." And couple of hours later, this lady, my wife, who told me she was sick, she just drove into the lady's compound, and she had a friend sitting in front with her. And she came down, and she didn't even draw. She didn't even take my daughter into the crèche. She just handed my daughter to the lady who was helping the proprietress. And I was shocked because my wife was fully dressed, and I was like, and she said, "You see what I'm saying? I've told her many times." And she said, "Have you been to her location where she works? Why can't she work in, why can't she work in the city?" I told her. She said, "Have you ever been there?" And I'm like, "Why am I going there?" And so, one day I went there. Oh gosh, it's funny now, but I remember when how devastated I was when it broke up, and I remember my dad saying then that there will be a time when I would talk about her or tell the story and I would laugh. Back then there was nothing to laugh about because it was my life on the line, you know. And so that was a glimpse of, and I'm like, where is she going to, absolute no, zero concern about her kid, um, and then just lots of stuff. She would go out. She would. One time I came home and I found a box of a container of sleeping pills. I'm like, who is using it? Little did I know that there were nights she would come to me with juice and say, hey, just for you to rest. I didn't know she was lacing them, so I would sleep through. But then I'm very observant, so we used to switch cars, and the day I found out she used to sneak out of the house in the night was one of the days I took her car, and she had packed it, but because she was smaller than me, but she forgot to adjust the seat. So that's how I knew. And then I asked the gate man, and he was kind of like, "Madam, say me cannot talk." Um, but that was it. She used to sneak out, and it just got worse. And then um, 3 years. So in 2009, yeah. So I went to her office. I didn't tell her I was coming, and I got there, and she was shocked because again, back to the issue of phones. I wasn't checking her phone. I don't believe I till today. I don't believe a man should go check his wife's phone or a woman should go check her husband's phone. If you have suspicions, just confront, not confront, but speak to the person. Don't go snooping in. Because they delete stuff. So how are you gonna find it? Anyway, she would come back. She would have excitedly. She's trying to share porn videos. I'm like, do you realize you're married? Where did you get this from? Well, it was one guy, and he sent it to you. Anyway, so I go see her in the office, and before then I had told her, hey, these numbers you need to. Of course, her usual solution was, yeah, I'm going to delete these numbers. But what she had done was she had saved it on her workstation, and so she used to make calls using her workstation. And so when I walked in, I caught her doing it. And I remember when she was walking me out, one of her colleagues was walking by, and he hit her on her bum, and that was it's in one of those periods that I tell myself, okay, Ryan, you're really a Christian because self control is one of the fruits of the Holy Spirit. And I know I got home, and I don't think I spoke to her for the entire trip. And I got home, I said, "Who is the guy that hit you on your bum?" And it was a full blown argument. That wasn't her bum; it was her waist. And I said, "What's the difference?" So what's the difference? I'm walking with you, and this guy smacks you on your butt. No, it's not her butt; it was her waist. Just crazy stuff. Just crazy stuff. Um, I know. I called the mom, which is something I wouldn't advise. If you're having issues with your spouse, don't go. Don't call them because they would always take their side. They always take. They would always. It's rare. It's rare for you to see that that family that would say, our child isn't behaving well, we need to step in. It's rare. And so I had spoken to the mom, because the mom was, usually, not usually, the home is run by the woman. That's the truth. And if you're talking about, usually the woman is the praying person in the family. And so that was something with her mom. So I told the mom, and the mom said, is juju. There's one of her dad's aunts who's not happy with her. So she's going to invite her to come for a deliverance. And that's why today, I have a skewed opinion about churches. You know, there's just a lot to talk about. You know, but one of the times I've spoken to the mom said, don't worry, she would handle it. That they were having a 3-day crusade, and there was going to be a prophetess or something. So I said, yeah, let her go, because I was already getting upset seeing her around. And she went. She left on a Friday to return on a Monday. So so I left work early on Monday, and I was like, yeah, let me surprise her. Because she's actually one of the few times I thought she was actually making efforts to improve herself. And so I was like, okay, you know what, let me go, let me be the supportive husband. And I had asked her, I texted her, she had said, yeah, it was fine. And so I got home, and and I didn't turn on the fan because I didn't want any noise. And so I would text her, "Are you home now?" She said, "Yes." And I looked, and I looked through the bedroom windows, and I'm like, "What home?" And so I was texting her from the bedroom, the master bedroom, and she was responding, "Yeah, I'm very really tired. I'm about to sleep. Before our kid comes back, so she could get some rest. So she could get some rest. And then because I used to get home around 6 p.m., around 4:35, the gate opens and she comes in, and of course she's on the phone. And I don't see anything. And this is me. I was stuck in the room, sweat, perspiring furiously, trying to be supportive. And so she comes inside, she opens the door, and she literally, she's visibly startled. And immediately she sees me, she falls to her knees and she starts begging me. I'm like, what are you begging me for? Oh, that the prophetess said it was her aunt Maria who was doing stuff. I told her, I said, I'm not interested. I'm not interested. She said, yeah, that the prophetess said the only person who can help her is her husband. I said, that's what she said. She said, yes. So I called the mom and I said, what exactly did you people do? What happened in the so-called event, women's event? She said, no, don't worry, God is in charge. Oh gosh, you know, God is in charge. So it was just one thing. And so she told me, yeah, the prophetess told me that the only person that can help me is my husband. I said, really? She said, yes. I said, okay. You know what? Get a notebook. Get a notebook. And anytime you lie, write it down in your notebook. So when I come back, you can easily just tell me, hey, I lied. Because that was the main thing. It was the lying. Because one thing I've learned in life is when you lie, there's several other things. The lie usually is the icing on the cake. You know, so it was just bad. It was just bad. It was really bad. There would be times I would look for me. It was just myself. It was myself, and it was just three of us: myself, herself, and my daughter. And and that was when I understood why married men would have marital affairs with their babysitters or something, because my daughter's babysitter was so nice because every year I'll give her a bonus. I will tell her when I'm coming home, because she had 4 kids, but you wouldn't know. By the time by the time I got home, my dinner will be laid out on the table. There will be water, warm water, and I never use warm water to bathe, but she would have drawn water for my bath and all that. This was just the babysitter doing all this, and that was when it clicked. Okay, this is why. Because then I used to wonder, your wife is pictured than your housemaid. Why are you, getting involved with your housemaid? But I understood that. Yeah, so it was just bad, and I kept on thinking it would get better, but it never did. It never did. Until things culminated into a point where I just had to pull a plug. So I'm gonna stop here. I'm gonna stop here for now. And if you're still watching, thank you for listening. Feel free to drop a comment. If you want to ask a question, feel free to leave a question. Once again, I want to appeal to you. Please subscribe if you haven't. Like the video, and please share it. Okay. And as I always say, the fact that you are still watching these, tells me one thing, and that's that God isn't done with you yet. So keep your chin up. Life isn't fair. You just learn to roll with the punches. There's nothing like clocking out. If it's your time, it's your time. But don't clock out on your own time. And just keep your faith alive, because at the end of the day, the best helping hands you'll find in life are at the end of your own two arms. So see you next time. Bye.